The evening air was crisp as people started gathering outside the Grand Metropolitan Concert Hall. It was one of those fancy places where everything looked expensive, from the marble columns at the entrance to the crystal chandeliers hanging inside. Tonight was special because Victor Ashford, one of the most famous pianists in the world, was performing. Tickets had sold out weeks ago, and people were already lining up dressed in their finest clothes. Inside the hall, things were quieter but tense. Victor had arrived 2 hours before the show, as he always did. He needed time to warm up, to feel the piano, to make sure everything was perfect. At 42 years old, he had performed in nearly every major concert hall across the globe. His fingers had danced across keys in Paris, New York, Tokyo, and London. Critics called him a genius. Magazines featured him on their covers. But success had changed him over the years. The kind young musician who once practiced in a tiny apartment had been replaced by someone who believed his talent made him better than everyone else. Victor stood on the empty stage, playing scales and arpeggios. His movements were precise, almost mechanical in their perfection. He frowned slightly, adjusting the piano bench by half an inch, then played a few more notes. Everything had to be exactly right. The hall manager knew better than to disturb him during these pre-show preparations. Even the cleaning staff had been told to stay away until he finished. That's when the side door creaked open. Victor's fingers stopped mid-scale. He turned his head sharply toward the sound, irritation flashing across his face. Someone was entering through the stage entrance, the one clearly marked for performers and staff only. He watched as an elderly woman stepped through, holding the arm of a young girl. The girl carried a white cane in her other hand, tapping it gently on the floor as she walked. The grandmother, Mrs. Chen, was 73 years old. She had worked as part of the cleaning crew at this very concert hall for nearly 20 years before retiring. She knew every corner of the building, every secret passage, every backstage room. Tonight she had used her old connections to bring her granddaughter here, just for a few minutes before the crowds arrived. She wanted the girl to experience the hall, to feel the space where great musicians performed. The girl's name was Lily. She was 17, with long dark hair tied back in a simple ponytail. Her eyes, though they couldn't see, seemed to take in everything around her. She moved carefully but with quiet confidence, her cane helping her navigate the unfamiliar space. There was something peaceful about her presence, a calmness that seemed to fill whatever room she entered. Victor stood up from the piano bench, his jaw tightening. He walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at the two intruders. His polished black shoes clicked against the wooden floor with each step. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice sharp and cold. "This is a private rehearsal. The hall doesn't open to the public for another hour." Mrs. Chen looked up, startled. She had hoped to slip in and out without being noticed. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly, her accent thick with nervousness. "Will just be a moment. I used to work here, you see, and I wanted my granddaughter to feel what it's like to stand in such a beautiful place." Victor's expression didn't soften. "Feel?" he repeated, his eyes moving to Lily's cane. "I see. Well, this is a concert hall, not a tourist attraction. I have a performance in less than 2 hours, and I need absolute focus." Lily stood quietly beside her grandmother, her face turned toward Victor's voice. She didn't speak, but her grip on the cane tightened slightly. She had heard that tone before many times. It was the voice of someone who had already decided she didn't belong. Mrs. Chen tried again. "Please, just 5 minutes. My Lily, she loves music more than anything in the world. She studies piano at the community center. She dreams of places like this." Victor let out a short, humorless laugh. "Piano?" He walked closer, descending the stage steps with deliberate slowness. "Tell me, how exactly does a blind person expect to master the piano? You need to see the keys, watch your hand positions, read the music, follow a conductor's gestures. Vision is essential to great performance." The words hung in the air like poison. Mrs. Chen felt her face grow hot with anger and shame, but she held her tongue. She had dealt with people like this before, people who looked at her granddaughter and saw only limitations. But Lily spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft but steady. Bach was nearly blind when he composed some of his greatest works. So was Handel. Beethoven couldn't hear at all. Victor raised an eyebrow, surprised that she had responded. "Those were rare exceptions," he said dismissively. "Masters who had already established their careers. Besides, this isn't about history lessons. This is about reality. The piano requires visual precision that you simply cannot have. He crossed his arms, looking at them with barely disguised contempt. "But since you claim to be a piano student, perhaps you'd like to prove your abilities. There's the piano right there." He gestured dramatically toward the magnificent Steinway grand piano on stage. "Go ahead. Show me what a blind pianist can do." It was meant to be cruel. Victor expected them to make excuses and leave, embarrassed and defeated. He had already turned slightly, ready to return to his rehearsal once they departed. But Lily didn't move to leave. Instead, she took a small step forward. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll play." Mrs. Chen grabbed her granddaughter's arm. "Lily, no. We should go. You don't have to prove anything to this man." But Lily gently pulled away. "It's all right, Grandma. I want to." Victor turned back, genuinely surprised. He hadn't expected her to accept. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth, not a kind one. "Very well then," he said. "By all means. Let's see what the community center has taught you." By now, a few other people had noticed the commotion. 2 members of the hall staff stood near the entrance. A woman from the events coordination team had paused in the aisle, her clipboard forgotten in her hands. They watched as this young blind girl began making her way toward the stage. Lily moved slowly but without hesitation. Her cane tapped against the floor, finding the edge of the stage. Mrs. Chen wanted to help her up the steps, but Lily shook her head slightly. She needed to do this herself, one step then another. Her free hand found the railing and she pulled herself up onto the stage. Victor watched from a few feet away, arms still crossed. He was already preparing his critique in his mind. He'd be polite but firm, explaining why she should perhaps focus on other pursuits. It would be a kindness, really, to help her understand her limitations now, rather than let her waste years chasing an impossible dream. Lily reached the piano and stood beside it for a moment. Her fingers touched the smooth, polished surface, tracing along the edge until she found the bench. She sat down carefully, adjusting her position. Then she did something interesting. She placed her hands lightly on the keys, not pressing them, just feeling their position, their spacing, their familiar shape under her fingertips. The small audience that had gathered held their breath. Even Victor found himself leaning forward slightly, curious despite himself about what would happen next. Lily lifted her hands, held them suspended for just a moment, and then brought them down to the keys. The first notes began to fill the hall. The sound that came from the piano wasn't what anyone expected. It wasn't hesitant or shaky. It wasn't the fumbling attempt of a nervous student. The notes flowed out clear and strong, filling every corner of the massive concert hall. Lily had started playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, a piece that required both technical skill and deep emotional understanding. Victor's smug expression began to shift. His eyes narrowed as he watched her hands move across the keys. She wasn't just hitting the right notes. She was playing with feeling, with purpose. Each phrase had shape and meaning. The dynamics rose and fell naturally, like breathing. This wasn't beginner's luck. This was real musicianship. But Victor wasn't ready to admit he had been wrong. Not yet. He told himself that she had probably memorized this one piece, practiced it thousands of times until her fingers knew it by muscle memory alone. Anyone could do that with enough repetition. It didn't make her a real pianist. When Lily finished the nocturne, there was a moment of silence. The few people who had gathered to watch stood frozen, not quite sure what they had just witnessed. Mrs. Chen had tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. She had heard her granddaughter play many times, but never in a space like this, where the acoustics made every note ring out like a bell. Victor clapped slowly, 3 times. The sound echoed in the hall, deliberate and mocking. "Not bad," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You've clearly practiced that piece quite a bit. But any decent student can memorize one song. Real pianists need versatility. They need to read music, adapt to different pieces, respond to changes on the fly." Lily remained seated at the piano, her hands resting gently on her lap. She didn't respond to his words. She just waited. "Can you play anything else?" Victor asked, stepping closer to the stage. "Or was that your entire repertoire?" One of the staff members, a young man named David who worked in the lighting booth, spoke up from the back. "Come on, man. She's just a kid. She played beautifully. Why are you being so harsh?" Victor shot him an annoyed glance. "I'm not being harsh. I'm being realistic. This young woman clearly has some talent, but she needs to understand the limitations she's facing. It's cruel to let her believe she can have a serious career as a pianist when the reality is far more complicated. Mrs. Chen started to move toward the stage, ready to take her granddaughter and leave. This had been a mistake. She should have known better than to bring Lily here, to expose her to someone so cold and cruel. But before she could reach the steps, Lily spoke. "What would you like me to play?" she asked calmly. Victor paused. He hadn't expected that response. Most people would have left by now, embarrassed or angry, but this girl seemed completely unbothered by his attacks. It was almost unsettling. "You're asking me to choose?" Victor said, a hint of challenge in his voice. "Yes," Lily replied simply. A slow smile spread across Victor's face. This was perfect. He could pick something impossible, something that would expose her limitations once and for all. Then they could end this charade and he could get back to his rehearsal. "All right," he said, walking over to his briefcase near the stage. He pulled out a thick folder of sheet music and flipped through it. "Let's try something more challenging. Can you play Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2? There were a few gasps from the small crowd. Even people who didn't know much about classical music had heard of Liszt. He was famous for writing some of the most technically difficult piano pieces ever composed. The Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 was a showpiece, full of lightning-fast runs, dramatic chords, and sections that required both hands to fly across the entire keyboard. Professional pianists spent months preparing it. Mrs. Chen's heart sank. "Victor, please," she said, using his name for the first time. "That's not fair. That's one of the hardest pieces in the repertoire." She asked what I wanted to hear. Victor said with a shrug. "This is what I'm curious about. Can she play it or can't she?" Lily sat quietly for a moment, her head tilted slightly as if she were listening to something no one else could hear. Then she nodded. "I can try," she said. "You can try?" Victor repeated, his eyebrows raised. "You mean you know it?" "I've played it before," Lily said, "but not in a while. I might make mistakes." Victor almost laughed. The confidence of this girl was remarkable, even if it was completely misplaced. "Please," he said, gesturing to the piano. "Show us what you can do." What happened next would be talked about in that concert hall for years to come. Lily placed her hands back on the keys. She took a deep breath, seeming to center herself. Then she began to play. The opening notes of the Hungarian Rhapsody rang out, slow and dramatic, filled with the melancholy of traditional Hungarian folk music. Her fingers found each note perfectly, even though she couldn't see the keys. But it was when the tempo changed that everyone truly understood what they were witnessing. The piece shifted into the famous Friska section, where the speed becomes almost impossibly fast. Lily's hands began to move in a blur. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, hitting complex chord progressions and rapid-fire scales with stunning accuracy. The music swirled around the hall like a storm, passionate and wild and absolutely electrifying. Victor's mouth fell open. He took an involuntary step backward, as if physically pushed by the force of what he was hearing. This wasn't possible. This level of playing required years of serious study, professional training, countless hours of practice. And yet here was this teenage girl, this blind girl he had mocked and dismissed, playing one of the most difficult pieces in the classical piano repertoire with a skill that rivaled professionals. David, the lighting technician, had pulled out his phone and started recording. The events coordinator stood with her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. 2 more staff members had emerged from backstage, drawn by the sound. Even the security guard from the front entrance had wandered in to see what was happening. Lily played through the entire piece, navigating every difficult passage, every dramatic shift in tempo and mood. Her body moved with the music, swaying slightly, completely absorbed in what she was creating. There was no sheet music in front of her, no one to guide her. Just her, the piano, and the music flowing from her fingers. When she reached the final triumphant chords and the last note rang out into silence, no one moved. No one spoke. The hall was completely still, as if the entire building was holding its breath. Then the applause started. It began with David clapping enthusiastically from the back. The events coordinator joined in, then the other staff members. Even Mrs. Chen, who had been crying quietly, started clapping through her tears. Victor stood alone near the stage, his hands at his sides. His face had gone pale. He stared at Lily as if seeing her for the first time, really seeing her. All his smugness, all his arrogance, all his certainty about how the world worked had been shattered in the space of 6 minutes. Lily remained seated at the piano, her hands folded in her lap again. She was breathing heavily from the exertion, but there was a small, peaceful smile on her face. She had felt the music in every cell of her body. That's what mattered to her. Not proving anything to anyone, not winning some argument, just the pure joy of playing. Victor slowly climbed the steps to the stage. His legs felt weak, unstable. When he reached the piano, he stood beside it for a long moment, unable to find words. Finally, he knelt down beside the bench, bringing himself to Lily's eye level even though she couldn't see him. "Where?" he whispered, his voice cracking slightly. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Lily turned her head toward the sound of Victor's voice. She could hear something different in it now. The sharpness was gone. The mockery had disappeared. What remained was something raw and genuine, almost vulnerable. "My teacher," Lily said softly. "Mr. Peterson. He used to perform professionally before he retired. Now he teaches at the community center for free." Victor felt his throat tighten. A community center, free lessons. This girl had learned to play at that level from some retired pianist in a community center, while he had trained at the finest conservatories in Europe, studied under famous masters, and had access to the best pianos and resources money could buy. "How long have you been playing?" Victor asked, still kneeling beside the piano bench. 9 years, Lily replied. "I started when I was 8. And your blindness? Were you born?" "I lost my sight when I was 8, Lily explained. "There was an infection. The doctors tried to save my vision, but they couldn't. For a long time I was angry. I felt like my whole world had ended. I couldn't do the things other kids did. I couldn't play the same games, couldn't read the same books. I felt so lost." Mrs. Chen had climbed onto the stage now and stood a few feet away, watching her granddaughter with pride and pain mixed together on her weathered face. She had been there through all of it, through the hospital stays, the tears, the difficult adjustment to a new way of living. "Then one day," Lily continued, "my grandma took me to the community center. There was a piano in one of the rooms and someone was playing. I just stood there listening, and for the first time since losing my sight, I felt something other than sadness. The music, it painted pictures in my mind. It made me feel things I couldn't put into words. After the person finished playing, I asked my grandma if I could touch the piano. A small smile crossed her face at the memory. Mr. Peterson was the one who had been playing. He asked me if I wanted to learn. I told him I couldn't see. And you know what he said? He said that was perfect because music isn't about seeing anyway. It's about feeling, about listening, about letting something inside you connect with the sound." Victor closed his eyes. He had spent so many years focused on technique, on precision, on making sure every performance was flawless. When had he stopped feeling the music? When had it become just about being perfect instead of being real? "He taught me differently than he taught the other students," Lily said. "He would play a piece first, let me hear it over and over. Then he'd guide my hands to the right positions, help me understand the patterns. He taught me to feel the distance between keys, to sense the movement of my arms and fingers. He said my ears would become sharper than most people's eyes if I learned to really listen." "And he was right," Victor whispered. "You hear things in the music that most pianists miss. The way you phrase the melodies, the subtle dynamics. That's not just technical skill. That's deep musical understanding." David, still recording from the back of the hall, zoomed in on Victor's face. The transformation was remarkable. The arrogant, cold pianist who had mocked a teenage girl just minutes ago now looked like a different person entirely. His eyes were red and there were actual tears on his cheeks. "I need to apologize," Victor said, his voice shaking. "What I said to you earlier, how I treated you, it was unforgivable. I was cruel and ignorant, and I'm deeply ashamed." Lily reached out her hand, and after a moment Victor understood. He took it gently. Her hand was small and warm in his. "You're not the first person to think I can't do something because I'm blind," Lily said, "and you probably won't be the last. People see the cane and they make assumptions. They think they know what I can and can't do. Most of the time I just ignore it and keep going. But today something made me want to show you. Maybe because you're someone who truly loves music too, even if you forgot that for a while." Those words hit Victor harder than any criticism ever had. She was right. He had forgotten. Somewhere along the way, performing had become about ego, about status, about proving he was better than everyone else. The pure love of music that had driven him as a young student had been buried under layers of pride and success. The events coordinator, A woman named Jennifer, who had worked at the hall for 15 years, approached the stage. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think people need to hear about this. What just happened here, it's extraordinary." Victor looked up at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "David recorded the whole thing," Jennifer said, nodding toward the back of the hall. "The performance, everything. This is the kind of story that changes lives. This young woman, her talent, her grace in the face of cruelty, and your transformation. People need to see this." Victor's first instinct was to say no. He worried about how it would make him look, about his reputation, about what people would think. But then he stopped himself. That was the old Victor thinking, the one who cared more about image than truth. "That's up to Lily," Victor said, looking at the girl beside him. "It's her story to tell or not tell." Lily was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Will it help other people?" she asked. "Other kids who are blind or different in some way? Will it show them they don't have to let anyone tell them what they can't do?" "Yes," Jennifer said firmly. "Absolutely yes." "Then okay," Lily said simply. Mrs. Chen stepped forward and placed a hand on her granddaughter's shoulder. "Are you sure, Lily? Once this goes out there, everything might change." Lily nodded. "Maybe that's not a bad thing, Grandma." Victor stood up slowly, his knees stiff from kneeling. He looked at the magnificent piano, then at Lily, then at the small group of people gathered in the hall. An idea was forming in his mind, something that would have seemed impossible to him an hour ago. "Lily," he said carefully, "I have a concert tonight. 2,000 people will be here. Critics, music lovers, some very important people in the classical music world. I'm scheduled to perform several pieces, including Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. Lily nodded, listening carefully. "The second movement of that concerto," Victor continued, "it's one of the most beautiful pieces of music ever written. It's about longing, about loss, about finding hope in darkness, and I think you would play it better than I ever could." The hall went completely silent. Everyone understood what he was suggesting, but no one quite believed it. "I want to invite you to perform with me tonight," Victor said, his voice clear and certain now, "as a guest artist. You would play the second movement while I perform the first and third." "We would share the stage," Mrs. Chen gasped. Jennifer's eyes went wide. David nearly dropped his phone. "But," Lily said hesitantly, "I've never performed in front of an audience like that. I've only played at small recitals at the community center." "I know," Victor said, "and I won't pressure you. This is entirely your choice, but I think the world deserves to hear you play, and honestly, I think I need you there tonight to remind me what music is really about." Lily sat very still, her hands folded in her lap. Her grandmother watched her carefully, ready to support whatever decision she made. The girl was thinking, weighing the fear against the opportunity, the comfort of her familiar world against the unknown possibility of something more. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lily took a deep breath. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll do it." Victor felt tears spring to his eyes again. He had performed for presidents and royalty, played in the greatest concert halls on earth, received standing ovations from thousands of people. But nothing, absolutely nothing in his entire career had moved him as much as this moment. This simple agreement from a brave young woman who had already taught him more in 20 minutes than he had learned in years. "Thank you," he whispered. "You have no idea what this means." But Lily smiled, and somehow it seemed like maybe she did know. Maybe she understood exactly what it meant for both of them. The next few hours passed in a blur. Jennifer immediately went into action, making phone calls and coordinating with the hall staff. Victor's manager, a stern woman named Catherine who had been with him for 10 years, arrived within 30 minutes. When Victor told her about the change in tonight's program, she looked at him like he had lost his mind. "You want to give up your solo spotlight to share the stage with an unknown teenager?" Catherine said, pacing back and forth in the green room. "Victor, do you understand what you're risking? Your reputation, the critics' reviews, everything we've built?" "I understand perfectly," Victor replied calmly. "And I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Catherine opened her mouth to argue further, then stopped. She had known Victor for a decade, managed his career through countless performances and tours. She had never heard that tone in his voice before. There was something different about him, something she couldn't quite name. He seemed lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. "Fine," she said finally. "But if this goes badly, don't say I didn't warn you." Meanwhile, in another part of the building, Lily sat with her grandmother in a small dressing room. Mrs. Chen was more nervous than her granddaughter, fussing over Lily's clothes and hair. The girl had come in casual pants and a simple sweater, not expecting to perform for anyone, let alone 2,000 people. "We need to get you something proper to wear," Mrs. Chen said anxiously. "You can't go on stage like this." Jennifer knocked and entered carrying a garment bag. "I thought you might need this," she said with a warm smile. She unzipped the bag to reveal a beautiful dark blue dress, elegant but not too formal, perfect for a young performer. "My daughter wore this to her college graduation. I think it would fit you perfectly." Lily stood and felt the fabric between her fingers. It was soft with a subtle texture that she liked. "It's beautiful," she said. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," Jennifer replied. "It would be an honor." While Lily changed, word was spreading throughout the building. The staff who had witnessed what happened earlier were telling others. David's video, though not yet posted online, was being passed from phone to phone backstage. People kept finding excuses to walk past the dressing room where the mysterious blind pianist was preparing, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. Victor spent the time differently. He sat alone at the piano on the empty stage, not playing, just thinking. He thought about why he had become a musician in the first place. He remembered being 7 years old, hearing his mother play old songs on their worn-out upright piano in their tiny apartment. He remembered the feeling of discovering that his fingers could create beauty, could make people feel something deep and real. When had he lost that? When had performing become about proving something rather than sharing something? His phone buzzed constantly with messages. Word had leaked about the change in the program, and journalists were already asking questions. His publicist wanted a statement. A music blog had posted something with the headline, "Famous Pianist's Mysterious Last-Minute Program Change." But Victor ignored all of it. For the first time in years, he didn't care what the press said. As the sun began to set, the hall doors opened to the public. The crowd filed in, dressed in their finest evening wear, holding programs and chattering excitedly. Most had no idea anything unusual was about to happen. They had come to see Victor Ashford perform his solo concert, just as advertised. In the lobby, a young woman named Rachel was among the crowd. She was 23 and had been blind since birth. Her parents had given her these tickets for her birthday because she loved classical music. She had grown up being told that she could appreciate music but never create it, not at a high level. Tonight, she just wanted to enjoy a beautiful performance. Backstage, Lily was warming up her fingers, playing silent scales on a practice pad that Jennifer had found for her. Her grandmother sat nearby, watching with a mixture of pride and worry. Mr. Peterson, Lily's teacher, had been called and was rushing to the hall. He couldn't believe what his student was about to do. Victor appeared at the dressing room door. He had changed into his concert attire, a sharp black suit that made him look every bit the international performer he was. But his expression was softer than it had been earlier, more open. "How are you feeling?" he asked Lily. "Nervous," she admitted with a small laugh. "Really nervous." "That's good," Victor said, stepping into the room. "Nerves mean you care. They keep you sharp. I still get nervous before every performance, even after all these years." "Really?" Lily asked, surprised. "Really," Victor confirmed. "The day I stop being nervous is the day I should stop performing. It means I've stopped respecting the music and the audience." He sat down in the chair across from her. "Listen, I want to tell you something. What's about to happen out there, it's not about proving anything to anyone. It's not about showing off or making a point. It's about sharing something beautiful with people who need to hear it. That's all it is. Just you, the piano, and the music. Everything else, all these people, the fancy hall, the critics, none of that matters." Lily nodded slowly. "Mr. Peterson tells me something similar. He says to just let the music speak." "He sounds like a wise teacher," Victor said. "I wish I'd had someone tell me that when I was younger. I might have avoided becoming the arrogant fool you met earlier today." A bell chimed, signaling 15 minutes until showtime. Victor stood up. "I'll perform the first movement of the concerto," he explained. "Then I'll introduce you and you'll play the second movement. Then I'll return for the third movement. We'll rehearse the transitions just once before we go on. Is that okay?" "Yes," Lily said, standing as well. Her hands were trembling slightly, but her voice was steady. Mrs. Chen hugged her granddaughter tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "No matter what happens out there, I'm so proud." The hall was filling up quickly. All 2,000 seats were occupied now. and the buzz of conversation created a low hum throughout the space. The orchestra members were taking their places, preparing their instruments. The conductor, an experienced man named Thomas, had been briefed on the unusual situation. He had agreed to adjust the performance, though he seemed skeptical about the whole thing. Rachel sat in her seat, running her fingers over the Braille program she had brought. Her parents sat on either side of her, describing the hall's elaborate decorations, the chandelier, the stage setup. But Rachel was listening to something else. The tuning of instruments, the acoustic quality of the space, the anticipation in people's voices. Behind the curtain, Victor stood in the wings, breathing deeply. Lily stood beside him, her grandmother holding her hand. Jennifer was there too, along with David and several other staff members who had insisted on watching from the side stage. They all felt like they were part of something special, something none of them would ever forget. The house lights began to dim. The crowd's chatter faded to silence. The conductor raised his baton. Victor looked down at Lily one last time. "Ready?" he whispered. Lily squeezed her grandmother's hand once, then let go. She lifted her chin, and there was something fierce and determined in her expression now, all traces of nervousness gone. "Ready," she said. The curtain began to rise, revealing the stage to the packed auditorium. Victor walked out first, and the audience erupted in applause. He bowed, acknowledging their welcome, then took his place at the piano. The applause died down. The conductor's baton was poised in the air, and then, as the orchestra began to play the opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, Victor's fingers descended onto the keys, and the music began to fill the hall with its powerful, sweeping melodies. The first movement was magnificent. Victor played with a passion that surprised even himself, pouring everything he had learned that day into every note. When it ended, the audience applauded enthusiastically, but they had no idea that the real magic was yet to come. As the applause for the first movement faded, Victor stood up from the piano and walked to center stage. The audience grew quiet, sensing something unexpected was about to happen. Victor had never been one for long speeches during performances, so this was unusual. "Thank you," he said, his voice carrying through the hall without a microphone. "Before we continue with the second movement, I need to share something with you. Today I was reminded of a truth I had forgotten. Music isn't about perfection or prestige. It's about honesty, about touching something real inside us. And sometimes the people who understand this best are the ones we least expect." He paused, looking toward the wings. "Tonight I'd like to invite a very special guest to perform the second movement with us. Her name is Lily Chen. She's 17 years old. She studies at a community center with a retired pianist. And this afternoon, she taught me more about music than I've learned in decades. Please welcome her to the stage." The audience applauded politely, confused but curious. Then Lily appeared from the wings, her white cane tapping softly against the stage floor. Mrs. Chen walked beside her, guiding her gently. The applause faltered as people realized this young girl was blind. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Rachel, sitting in the audience, leaned forward in her seat. Her mother whispered a description of what was happening, but Rachel had already understood from the sound of the cane, the careful footsteps. A blind girl was about to perform at a professional concert. Her heart began to race. Victor met Lily at the piano and helped her get situated on the bench. He adjusted it to the right height and made sure she was comfortable. Then he leaned down and whispered something only she could hear. "Remember, just you and the music. Nothing else matters," Lily nodded. Victor walked off stage, leaving her alone in the spotlight. The massive hall was completely silent now. 2,000 people held their breath, waiting to see what would happen. Some were skeptical, some were curious. Some, like Rachel, were hoping for something they couldn't quite name. The conductor raised his baton. The orchestra began the gentle, haunting introduction to the second movement. The strings played softly, creating a bed of sound that seemed to float through the air. This movement was different from the powerful first movement. It was intimate, vulnerable, achingly beautiful. Then came Lily's entrance. Her hands found the keys and the first notes emerged clear and pure. The melody she played was simple at first, almost fragile, like someone reaching out in the darkness. But there was something in the way she played it, a depth of feeling that made people's throats tighten. As the movement progressed, Lily's playing grew more confident. Her fingers moved across the keys with the grace of someone who had spent years learning to trust them completely. She didn't just play the notes. She lived inside them. Every phrase had meaning. Every pause said something important. The music swelled and retreated like breathing, like the ocean, like a heart beating. People in the audience began to react. A woman in the third row pulled a tissue from her purse, tears streaming down her face. An elderly man who had been a musician himself felt his hands trembling in his lap. He recognized what he was hearing. This wasn't just talent. This was truth. Rachel sat with her eyes closed even though she couldn't see anyway. She was absorbing every note, every nuance. For the first time in her life, she heard what was possible. All those years of being told that blind people couldn't truly excel at piano. All those limitations that had been placed on her dreams. They were crumbling with every note that Lily played. The music built to its emotional peak and Lily's whole body moved with it. She swayed slightly, her face tilted upward, completely lost in the moment. The orchestra surrounded her with lush harmonies, but she never lost her way. She played as if she had memorized not just the notes but the feeling of every single moment. When the final notes faded away, there was a long moment of absolute silence. It was the kind of silence that happens when something profound has just occurred, when people need a moment to understand what they've experienced. Then someone started clapping. It was Rachel. She stood up in her seat and applauded, tears running down her cheeks. Her parents stood with her. Then the person behind them stood. Then the entire row. Within seconds, the whole audience was on their feet, applauding thunderously. The sound was deafening, overwhelming. Lily sat at the piano, startled by the reaction. She hadn't expected this. She couldn't see the standing ovation, couldn't see the tears on so many faces, couldn't see the way people were looking at her with wonder and respect. But she could hear it. She could feel the vibration of 2,000 people expressing something that went beyond words. Victor walked back onto the stage, applauding as well. He approached Lily and gently helped her to her feet, then guided her to center stage. The applause continued, growing even louder. People were shouting, "Brava!" Some were wiping their eyes. Some were hugging the people next to them. In the wings, Mrs. Chen was sobbing, her hands covering her face. Jennifer stood beside her, one arm around the older woman's shoulders, crying herself. David was still recording, making sure to capture every second of this moment. The ovation went on for nearly 5 minutes. Victor just stood there beside Lily, letting her experience it fully. Finally, when it began to quiet, he led her gently off the stage. The audience sat back down, buzzing with energy and emotion. Victor returned alone to finish the performance. He played the third movement with a fire and joy he hadn't felt in years. When the entire concerto was complete and he took his final bow, the audience gave him a standing ovation too. But everyone knew that the real standing ovation had been for the young woman who had played before him. After the concert, the backstage area was chaos. Reporters had somehow gotten in, along with dozens of people wanting to meet Lily. Victor's manager, Catherine, who had been so skeptical earlier, was now fielding interview requests and already talking about future opportunities. Mr. Peterson had arrived just in time to see his student's performance and was overwhelmed with pride and disbelief. But Victor made sure Lily wasn't overwhelmed. He asked security to keep the crowd at a distance and created a quiet space where Lily could sit with her grandmother and her teacher. He sat with them, just the four of them, while the chaos swirled outside. "You know what's going to happen now, don't you?" Mr. Peterson said to Lily. "Everything is about to change for you." "I know," Lily said softly. "Is that okay?" "That depends on what you want," Mr. Peterson replied. "You could have a career as a professional pianist if that's what you choose. But you could also choose to just keep playing for the love of it, without all the pressure and spotlight." Lily thought about this. "I don't know what I want yet," she admitted. "Today has been a lot," Victor spoke up. "You don't have to decide anything tonight. But I want you to know something. I have connections with several music conservatories. If you want to pursue serious training, I can help make that happen. Full scholarship, the best teachers, everything you need. Not because of what happened today, but because you have genuine, extraordinary talent that deserves to be nurtured." Lily turned toward his voice. "Why would you do that for me?" "Because you reminded me why I became a musician in the first place," Victor said simply. "And because every artist who came before me helped lift me up. This is how I pass that forward. But again, no pressure. It's your choice." Outside, Rachel waited with her parents, hoping for a chance to meet Lily. She wasn't the only one. Dozens of young people who were blind or had other disabilities had somehow heard what happened and rushed to the concert hall. They all wanted to meet the girl who had shown them what was possible. When Lily finally emerged, exhausted but happy, she was greeted by a crowd of young people who saw themselves in her. She couldn't see their faces, but she could hear the hope in their voices as they thanked her, told her their stories, asked her questions. And in that moment, Lily understood that what happened today was bigger than just playing a piano concerto. She had opened a door for people like herself, people who had been told they couldn't do something because of how they were different. She had shown them that limitations are often just stories we tell ourselves or that others tell us. 3 months later, Lily enrolled in the prestigious conservatory with a full scholarship that Victor had helped arrange. She would study there for the next 4 years, developing her gift while inspiring countless others. Victor became her mentor and friend, and he often said in interviews that meeting Lily had saved his career and his soul. Rachel, the young woman from the audience, started taking piano lessons again. She had given up years ago because people convinced her it was pointless. Now she practiced every day, not because she wanted to be famous, but because Lily had shown her that music belonged to her too. And sometimes, late at night, Lily would sit at the piano in the conservatory's practice room and remember that day. The mockery, the challenge, the fear, and finally the moment when everything changed. She would remember that the most important thing wasn't what she couldn't see. It was what she could feel, and what she could help others feel through the universal language of music that knows no boundaries, requires no sight, and speaks directly to the human heart.